I feel almost like the funeral director, you know. Yeah. Pleasure to see everybody out this morning. We will pick back up in Ecclesiastes in just a moment, but if you would, all bow with me and we'll have a word of prayer. Our great and wise God, our all-knowing, all-seeing God, to say that we are small in your sight, it just does not seem to communicate just how small, just how minuscule, microscopic that we feel in your sight, just how helpless that we feel at times in this world that we live in, and we so appreciate the promises that you have made us. We so appreciate the meat that you have given us to chew upon in your word. And we appreciate the lessons that we have been able to learn as we have spent time in these two books the last few months. Father, we know nothing else to say but praise God, from whom all blessings flow, and thanks be to God Almighty for his many and wonderful gifts. Please be with us, be with Marshall as he teaches, be with others as they stand before their classes this morning. May we all come to the conclusions that you would have us to as we are examining your word this morning, and more so, may we all make that a part of our lives. May we direct every step, every thought, every decision that we make, may we make it in accordance with your word. And may we glorify you in all that we do, and glorify the Son of God who gave his life for us. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.
Good morning. If you would, please open your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 11. I'd like to extend my thanks again to Andrew for teaching this past week. He said he was at the wrong place at the wrong time, and I think it was probably just right. Appreciate him doing that. We are going to be coming to the conclusion of this book, and perhaps we might say that we are hitting the end of the principles to apply to the observations that Solomon has made, and then coming to a full conclusion in our next lesson. Because we have a little bit more to cover in chapters 11:1 through 12:8, we may kind of bleed over into the next class. We'll see how that all plays out. We only have a few verses to cover next period, but then if we have time, I'm going to try to draw it to some final conclusions and then also some New Testament connections. So we'll just see how much time we have had. I appreciate the opportunity to teach these books. This is the first time I've really dove deep into Song of Songs, and then taught Ecclesiastes a few times, but it was good to come back to it and kind of look at it with fresh eyes. I'm going to ask a question in just a moment that will tie Wednesday night class to this morning, but I would just remind us of the outline that I have up here, that you kind of have this exhortation in chapter 10 to embrace wisdom now, and then when you embrace wisdom, it's going to push your perspective to the future. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how that life of wisdom is going to play out in the present and in the future as we look at this section. Does anybody have any comments or questions before we get started? All right. I want to begin with a quote that I found that I think summarizes well this section. It says, "Life offers few guarantees. Work diligently and wisely, and remember God as you engage life." And I think that's a pretty good summary of what we're going to be looking at here in chapter 11 on into chapter 12. All right, so let's begin with the first point as we are looking to the future, and that is, what does wisdom look like in a fallen world? How do you live out wisdom, knowing that there are great mysteries associated with God's work in this world, but there are also great injustices that are produced by humans living as fallen beings? What does this look like? And so let's read verses 1 through 6 and see he's going to give a command and then a reason, and then another command and then another reason, And we'll see how that plays out. All right, he says, send your bread upon the face of the water, for in many days you will find it. Give an allotment to 7 and even to 8, for you do not know what evil will be upon the land. If the clouds are full, they will empty themselves of rain on the land. And if a tree falls in the south or in the north, the place where it falls, there the tree will lie. The one who watches the wind will not scatter seed, and the one who sees the clouds will not reap a harvest. Just as you do not know what the path of the wind will be, or how the bones will form in the womb of the pregnant woman, so you do not know the work of God, who does all these things. In the morning, scatter your seed, and in the evening, do not give your hand rest, because you do not know which will succeed, this one or that one, or if both alike will be good. All right, so again, we have a command and then an extended reason why to obey those commands. And then we have another command and then a short reason. And this is ultimately connected to the providence of God. Now, I want to begin with this first question to just kind of get the context of where we've been and where we're going. How do the commands and warnings of chapter 11, verses 1 through 6, connect with the previous chapter? What were some things you came up with as you compared these two chapters?
The things that we just concluded chapter 10 with were some practical advice or outlook, really very proverbial in a lot of ways. And so I think we have something similar here. The focus is on diversifying in order to soften the blow of some of this vanity that Solomon's been talking about. So in other words, okay, some things will fail. It's unlikely that all of them will fail.
Right. Good. We'll come back to that point a little bit more. Any other thoughts?
If I understand verse 4 correctly, where it says, he who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. It just sounds like a person who's watching the weather and, if there's just something that's off, I'm not going to get out there and till or work my crops. Reminds me of chapter 10, verse 18. By much laziness, the building decays. So there's a connection of laziness and just letting things rot, fall apart.
Good. Stephen?
Yeah, I think it's the antidote to the most likely outcome of looking at all vanities, what Brad was pointing to, that the solution is not do nothing. The solution is be as wise as is possible to be in a world where, and so, somebody might say, in that verse Tony's pointing to, what's the point? What's the point in sowing? What's the point in reaping? There's still wisdom in going and doing and acting, but in wise and measured ways.
Thankfully, we have started to move away from this phrase, but the I can't even movement. There is this sense in which people who are abandoning wisdom are going to think there's just nothing here. There's no purpose. He is saying wisdom is going to actually get you to do something. And so I think he's tying these two chapters together by pointing out that, yes, there is always risk. Chapter 10, there's risk of sin destroying much good. But how do you mitigate that risk? Wisdom will help you to mitigate that risk. Let's see. I jotted down one of my son Caleb's favorite quotes. And obviously, listen to this with a grain of salt. Courage is knowing it might hurt and doing it anyway. Stupidity is the same, and that's why life is hard. And I think he is dealing with some of those difficulties, isn't he? Except he is not saying, hey, these are exactly the same. He's saying, abandon folly, pursue wisdom, and don't just give up in the face of risk. Do something. And we're ultimately going to see the providence of God involved in this. Recognize that there are limits to our control. I think that's another theme that transcends chapters 10 and 11, is that there are limits, but that doesn't mean you are completely limited. And so what he is doing, I think, is fixing some of he's giving some counterpoints to some fallacious ways of looking at some of the principles that he gave in chapter 10. He's pushing people forward toward God. As we talk about risk and as we talk about diversification, those kinds of things, I I came across an interesting statistic. I know some of you might actually like baseball. Some of you may not care whatsoever. But Babe Ruth had, at least in one season, a strikeout average of 15.8%. The average player had, in that season, would have had an average strikeout of 8.1%. And who was better? The person who had the 8.1 strikeout record, or maybe even the person who had got up and did it once and had no strikeout record, or Babe Ruth? Well, if we look at his career average, what do you have? 715 career home runs, only behind Barry Bonds and Hank Aaron. I mean, there was a risk that you could strike out, and he struck out a lot. But there are also great gains that could be achieved. And I think Solomon is going to say wisdom actually takes the risks, but doesn't do it foolishly. So that's what we're going to be looking for, is not taking foolish risks or living a life of folly, which is going to be the main idea as you get to the young person a little bit later, is yes, enjoy life, but recognize some of the things that you need to keep in mind, especially in view of God. All right, so let's go to question number 2, which kind of deals with some of these themes. How do we avoid decision paralysis if Ecclesiastes condemns rashness but also indicates that the perfect conditions will rarely or perhaps sometimes never come? Another way of putting this before I open it up for your answers is one commentator said, people can focus on things that might go wrong in ways that lead to the paralysis of analysis. And then he went through and tried to describe how you can avoid that paralysis, either decision paralysis, as I put it here, or paralysis of analysis, as he puts it. Well, what are some of your thoughts as you read through chapter 11 and compare it to everything we've seen in Ecclesiastes? How do we avoid rashness, but also take the risks?
There are always circumstances that we look at, and they can cause us to pause or even delay in doing things that we ought to do. I think the idea is that we shouldn't allow, the things we see around us necessarily stop us from doing those things that must be done. Maybe it's a poor analysis, but when it came time to planting your garden, my dad planted by the signs. And my schedule didn't always match up to that, and I didn't much care for the signs anyway myself. But he would kind of fuss at me, and my response was always, I will plant it when I have the time and I'm available, because I know one thing, the seed will not grow in the bag. And that's kind of, I think, what we're seeing here. You got to put it in the ground if you expect to reap a crop.
Exactly. We have two.
From morning to evening, and you don't know. It's in the Lord's hands. I knew a cotton farmer that, he did everything he knew to do, and he worried about his crop until it was in the barn. And once it was in the barn, he was fine. But he did all that he could do in taking care of his crop.
Yeah, there's a couple of extremes, aren't there? You have the fool who says, I don't know with certainty anything that's going to come, so I'm not going to do anything. You have the person who may be thinking wisdom is going to solve the problem, and that's the person that has that vexation of spirit because they have grown in knowledge to the point that they may even with kind of a pious mask on say, well, until God directly reveals this is his will, until I can do the absolute best, I'm not going to do anything. What he seems to be saying is, you use wisdom as best you can, and that means you're going to have to send your product across the seas. He's probably talking about trade there, where he talks about casting bread upon the waters, though there are different interpretations of that. But he's like, try different things. And here is something that I think is important. Wisdom does not demand that you always have the foresight to know exactly what's going to be the best every time. You just do what is good every time. Do something good. Do multiple good things and see which one plays out well. Additional thoughts on that?
You're in Galatians 6 squarely. We're talking about where we reap, we shall sow, but then ends with so then as we have opportunities, let us do good to everyone, especially those who have of the household of faith. We're not trying to do good. We will do no good. If we're not always going to land on the best possible result, but if we're trying, we're going to do something good for someone.
Right. Very good. Any other thoughts?
Chapter 10, verse 14 there, it says, "A fool also multiplies words. No man knows what is to be. Who can tell what will be after him?" So it seems like one of the hallmarks of folly is focusing on things that you cannot know, and spending a lot of time invested in that when there's nothing to be gained from it. And so just don't focus on those things. Recognize that you can't know them, and just move forward.
Very good.
A lot of the illustrations you find here are based on the time that it took place in, essentially an agricultural society. That you see that you sow in the morning, or you sow early, but you don't know whether that crop's going to succeed or not. So don't rest on your laurels. Move on to something else with your hands in the evening. I can relate to that because I grew up in an agricultural society, the 80s days, I might add. But I had an uncle who was replied to, well, he was a farmer. He would go out and he'd sow his crops, but in the evening, you would find him doing other things. He might be repairing equipment, or he might be making furniture because he had that talent.
Yeah, I grew up on a mini farm, if you will, only about 20, 30 acres. And we never grew crop or anything, but we had cows and we did hay, and Dad always had something we could do. There was always the next job that we were involved in, and so you know, some of those things, some equipment might break down, and so you're hoping that you have this other option that is working out well, and so yeah, there's wisdom in this. This is practical everyday life in a world where things don't always work out perfectly, and he's trying to bring us to that kind of a wisdom. But I think there are two main ideas that he is focusing in on. Is because we live in a fallen world, we do have to diversify. We do have to try multiple good things and hope that they will be successful. Now, the Bible also talks about there will be times when nothing is successful. And so whether it all be good, be kind of half and half, or whether it all be bad, that's where he comes to the second idea is you need to appreciate the work of God in all this. Who is the one who is doing all these things? God is. Did you see that there in verse number 5? You do not know the work of God who does all these things. Solomon is not a skeptic. Solomon is someone who says, I don't know everything, but it's in the hands of God. And that is a level of trust that matches up with his earlier statements in Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. And so there is a picture of trust in the sovereignty of God and being willing to try whatever we can do, but realize we have limited control. God is the one who is in control of all. Any additional thoughts there? All right. Then moving on to the next section. After he said, do with the best you can in this life where things don't always work out the way you want, he says, find the joy. Find the joy in life. Verses 7 and 8. Now, sweet is the light, and good it is for the eyes to see the sun. For if a man lives many years, let him rejoice in all of them. But let him remember the days of darkness, because they will be many. All that is coming is vanity. Now, I would just note here we have a slight shift from just all is vanity to all that is coming is vanity. Now, he's going to build on this idea, but this is more future looking. So in this context, he's looking more to the future, and he brings up two important words, rejoice and remember. He's going to kind of build on those and direct them to the youth, particularly the young man, it seems like, just like Proverbs, which is written to Solomon's son or sons. So also we have kind of the sage who is teaching the young man, telling him what he must do, kind of speaking from experience. Solomon is saying, you need to rejoice, but you also need to remember. And so he speaks in a more generic term before he directs to the young people exactly. He says, if you live a long time, rejoice, but also remember what's coming. And he's going to talk more about that. So how should we live in the present? If you have those two key words, what do you think is the takeaway from this? How do we live in a fallen world and yet somehow still find joy? How do you do that?
With thankfulness and contentment.
Thankfulness and contentment. Very good. Any additional thoughts?
There will be dark days in the future, bad fortune. But when you have the days of light, that is the days of joy that you can rejoice in those. And you can rejoice in the dark days also if you have the right perspective. Meaning, this too shall pass. When the days are dark, just realize that God's still in control and that things will work out in the end. And if they don't, I will rejoice in the Lord.
Good. Any other thoughts? I will come back to this idea of enjoying life. Some people have read the book of Ecclesiastes and think this is a pessimistic book from a nearly skeptical writer who is basically saying, hey, just get what you can get now because you don't know what's coming and you don't even know what's happening after death. That's not what I read as I read through the book of Ecclesiastes. I think there is this lens of, yes, things look bad. Things are sometimes bad. But he's saying you can enjoy aspects of this life if you are looking not just an under the sun perspective, but from the perspective of God. If you have a reverence for God, if you recognize the gifts of God, and if you're under the sovereignty of God, he says enjoy life. Though not always the same word every time, I find it somewhat interesting that the theme of enjoy life, at least, maybe at most, happens 7 times in the book, this section being the last one. Is it coincidence that it just happens to be 7 times that he urges them to enjoy life? Probably not. There's probably some significance to that 7-fold enjoy life theme. You can find it in chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 5, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, and chapter 11. And so he is coming back to this theme over and over and over again. He's saying, yes, rejoice, enjoy. This is what God intends for you. But as you do that, as you are enjoying the good, be prepared for the darkness. Now, the darkness, as Tony said, could just be the generic darkness of bad times that we face. I think in context, he's even going to get more direct and talk about as you get older and weaker and die. And so he's looking to that darkness, and how do we enjoy life in view of that? Some people would look at it and say, I can't enjoy anything now if I know I'm going to get old. That's kind of, there's a misconception about the honor of being older in our culture. And he is saying, but there will be weakness. There will be a darkness that comes. How do you prepare for that? And I think the Jews who wrote the Talmud had an interesting point of view that I think matches up with Ecclesiastes. And so I'm going to read it for you and recognize this is not inspired, but there's a lot of wisdom in what these Jews said. Everyone must give an account before God of all good things one saw in life and did not enjoy. Isn't that an interesting perspective on judgment? Not just did you do wrong, but did you not enjoy life? I think that's part of what Ecclesiastes is trying to get at. Are you missing the gifts of God because of the injustice and the evil that is in this world, because of the darkness that is coming? Or are you seeing the good, giving thanks, and enjoying? That's going to be part of our judgment. I think that matches up with Scripture. I think we are expected to see the good and enjoy it. So we have to enjoy this life, recognizing the things that are outside of our control, recognizing the things that will be bad in this life, but recognize that there is balance when we come under the control of God, we serve under the rule of God, we can enjoy even those little things like eating a meal or having a wife who loves us or a husband who loves us, and so on and so forth. He says, rejoice. And remember, those are commands. We are to rejoice in the good that God gives to us. Any additional thoughts there?
There's a cynical way to look at things where people might see the good things well, yeah, things are good now, but it won't be long till things fall apart and blow up in my face. Because they always do, and you're just always cynically looking at what is going to go wrong. In other words, yeah, it's good too, it's good now, but this too shall pass. In other words, looking at it in the opposite way, instead of, like you just said, rejoice in the good and enjoy it at all times.
He wants us to have a good perspective. He's not taking away from the idea of lamenting when things are bad, but he is saying there are things to enjoy in this life, and they come from the hand of God. As you were talking about that, I thought about Eeyore, and I also thought that a lot of people have kind of an Eeyore perspective, but then Beth and I are reading The Silver Chair in the Chronicles of Narnia series right now, and we just got to Puddleglum, the marshwiggle, who everything is depressing, everything is bad. And, Ecclesiastes is saying, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Some people might say, that's an Eeyore, that's a Puddleglum perspective. He is giving the perspective under the sun to contrast that with, you can enjoy this life. You can enjoy this in the fear of God, in thanksgiving to God, and you can actually live a life that even when those dark days come, it's not going to be the end of the world for you, because you know what is hereafter. All right, so let's go on to the next section here, and we'll talk about those themes of rejoice and remember again, but now directed toward the young man. And we're going to read 11:9 through 12 and verse 7 together. It says, "Rejoice, O young man, in your childhood, and let your heart do you good in the days of your young manhood, and walk in the ways of your heart and in what your eyes see. But know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. So then, cause grief to turn away from your heart, and cause evil to pass away from your flesh, for childhood and the prime of life are vanity," or maybe we should translate vanity there as fleeting. Remember your Creator in the days of young manhood, before the evil days come, and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them, before the sun darkens, as well as the light of the moon and the stars, and the clouds return after the rain. In the days when the keepers of the house tremble, and the men of valor are stooped over, and the women who grind meal cease because they are few, and the women who look through the windows darken. And the doors along the street are shut, and the sound of the grinding mill is low, and he rises at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of the song bow down. Yes, they are even afraid of height and terrors in the way. And the almond tree blossoms, and the grasshopper drags himself along, and the caperberry shrivels up because the man is going to his eternal house, and the ones who mourn are circling in the street. Before the silver cord is loosed, and the golden bowl breaks, and the pitcher upon the fountain is shattered, and the wheel at the well is broken, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, but the breath returns to God who gave it. Now, before we discuss this section, I would just note that Ecclesiastes began with vanity of vanities, all is vanity, and then a poem about the fleeting nature of human existence, human life. How does it end? With a poem about describing the inevitable nature of human death, followed by vanity of vanities, all is vanity. We've got bookends here. And what he is trying to do is emphasize something about their relationship to life and implicitly to God. And so we have this twofold phrase, rejoice and remember. All right, I want to ask the question before I come back and talk about some of these things. We'll talk about some of the specific possible meanings of this poem, but let's answer question number 4 first. Who especially should consider the future and why?
Young man, because age and the end of his days comes very quickly, and now's the time to start serving God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very good. Any additional thoughts there?
But it tends to be the young who will give themselves over to the pleasures that they can enjoy while they are young without giving thought to the consequences. I love the balance that he has there. Remove sorrow from your heart and put away evil from your flesh. And so he seems to be saying, enjoy certain things, but don't go too far, because there will be a judgment for when you go too far.
Very good. And if we include as part of that kind of that idea that the Jews in the Talmud have as well, is that, do good for your heart and enjoy what you see, but know that God's going to bring you into judgment for all these things. What things? Maybe the bad that you do with those good things, or maybe you're going to come into give an account to God for the good things and what you do with that. And so I think it's kind of a whole life perspective of what are you doing with the good? And what are you doing with the evil that is around you? How are you approaching these things? He's saying, have a Godward perspective here. And I think that is probably one of the most difficult things for young people to recognize is mortality and their relationship with God. It is, Solomon wants them to think, yes, right now you are strong, you are fit, you think you can take on the world. You can in a lot of ways. You can do things that other people can't do. Just know that's going to go away. And what are you doing right now that will prepare you for when those days are gone? And I admit, when we are younger, sometimes it is even difficult just to fathom the idea of 30 years from now, what I'm going to be. Wisdom says, can you start to push yourself to the future? And can you start to recognize your accountability to God now?
Have you heard that they don't tell you? They don't tell you that when you reach a certain age, this doesn't work anymore. This kind of thing starts happening. And so I think it's just interesting that we have that sort of thing here that he follows up with as he starts to close the chapter out.
Yeah. I can't remember how many older people that I have a lot of respect for have said, getting old is not for sissies. And there's a lot of truth to that. And yet what he is urging is, are you laying foundations now when you're young so that the dark days do not destroy your life? How many people have we seen, I can speak from experience of my own family, that have not laid God-fearing foundations in their youth so that they are just a mess when they're older? There's wisdom that says, even though you don't know what's coming, can you prepare now for what is eventually going to happen to everyone? Are you prepared for that? Just a couple of quick notes on this poem. It's probably impossible to say with absolute certainty what every single figure means. In fact, some commentators even say maybe it's purposefully ambiguous so that there are multiple, so it's just a picture as a whole. But I think there are some things that we could point to specifically that he is describing as the days of darkness that are coming. Notice that when he talks about the sun darkening and the light of the moon and the stars darkening and the clouds coming after the rain, even though he may be talking about eyesight and things along that nature, it's kind of beginning with almost an apocalyptic type view of the sun and the moon no longer give, and the stars no longer give their light. Does that sound familiar? It's kind of an ending of an age, an ending of an era. And but he's probably pointing to the weakness that is coming in. So you have eyesight dimming, you have the keepers of the house trembling. There's probably weakness that he's looking at. That the grinders, probably talking about the teeth being lost. As he talks about those who look through the windows, this may be talking about eyesight as well, just dimness of being able to see. It could be, some have suggested, that this is slightly different than the stars, sun and moon and stars going out, but this is the sparkle dims, and there's kind of a dullness to the eyes. That the doors are shut. That's probably talking about hearing, because now you can't hear the sound of the grinding mill very much. But the irony, the paradox, especially for those of us who are in middle age and older, is that maybe you can't hear as well, but then the sound of a bird can wake you up in the middle of the night and you can't get back to sleep. He talks about feebleness, as he talks about being afraid of the heights and so on and so forth. The almond tree blossoms, sign act right here. That's exactly what's happening, that the white hair develops, that you have the, he talks about the caperberry, or the grasshopper dragging himself along, possibly talking about joint pain and weakness. Then the caperberry shrivels up, that's talking about sexual desire, ending. As you move into the end there, he kind of gives a little parentheses to say, the man is going to his eternal home, and the ones who mourn are circling in the streets. It's almost like he has a picture of, as this person is diminishing, you can already start to hear the funeral songs being played. This person is going on to his home, and then he comes back to the poem as before the silver cord is loosed and the golden bowl breaks, the spring of life is ended, and so death has finally come, and dust returns to the earth, and the breath returns to God who gave it. He's saying, young people, you need to envision this is where you're going. This is what it's going to be like. I think this is an important reason for having young people not only engage with other young people, but spend some time with some older people, because they're going to get some wisdom by being around those who are already experiencing those things, so that they can begin to have the perspective of how they need to live now in view of where they are going. We are not invincible. We are eventually going to get weaker and weaker. And in that weakness, we are not as capable. Not that we can't do good things, but we can't do the same amount of good things that we could in our youth. And I think he's saying, make the most of your time while you have the energy, while you have the mind. I wish I could go back and have the firing of my synapses that I had 20 years ago and start learning some things a little bit better, memorizing a few more things, so that it wouldn't be as hard. And give me another 20 years, and I'll probably wish I had back to when I was almost 40, that things start to diminish. Are we wasting our time in our youth? Or are we making the most of it now so that we are in a better position, so that we have that good name when we finally come to the house of mourning? All right, any additional thoughts there? All right, we've got about 2 minutes. I think we can, if I'm reading the clock right, that means we can finish up verse number 8, and that will allow us to pick up in the conclusion next time. So he concludes with all is vanity. Just like he began, so he's going to end. Vanity of vanities, says the Speaker of the Assembly, all is vanity. And I want to ask you, besides just having a nice literary structure of bookend here of all is vanity, ending with all is vanity, why do you suppose Ecclesiastes or Solomon repeats these words as he closes out the book?
What came to mind is when you have a mathematician working through a proof, and then he closes, when he reaches the answer, he closes, basically, I have demonstrated what I set out to prove. And that seems to be the kind of thing I started saying vanity is vanity, and he's just asserting it at that point. And he's gone through all of these things in various areas of life, and then he's finally concluded. Don't you agree with me? Vanity's vanity. Haven't I shown what I set out to prove?
Very good. And then he'll come back at the end and say, and here's how you can get past that. Any additional thoughts? I'll read one final quote here. I can't remember who I pulled this from, but I am quoting from someone. Someone has said that you try to quote the name the first time, then you say someone said the second time, and then it can be yours the third time. But it said, everything is vanity when viewed through the lens of mystery and mortality, but life finds its meaning when viewed through the lenses of divine grace and providence. And I think those are the twin themes of, yes, it's all vanity, if you're only looking from an under-the-sun perspective. But when you see the gifts of God, you see the sovereignty of the providence of God at work, that allows you to find meaning in this life and even joy in the good things and endurance in the bad. We'll close out there, and then we'll pick up with verse 9 next time. Thank you for your participation.